My best friend's 9-year-old daughter was dying. She needed a rare blood transfusion to survive, and miraculously, my husband stepped up as the only match. But when the doctor walked out of the sterile hospital doors with the test results, the words that left his mouth did not bring relief. They shattered my entire reality. The child was not just a match. She was his biological daughter. My name is Nia, 34 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds the people closest to me inflicted. As a successful chief executive officer of a crisis management firm in Atlanta, I spend my days fixing other people's disasters, completely unaware that my own marriage was the biggest fraud of all. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your intelligence and your worth. The fluorescent lights of Emory University Hospital buzzed above us like a swarm of angry bees. It was freezing in the waiting area, that specific kind of hospital cold that seeps deep into your bones and makes your hands shake. The sterile smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol turned my stomach, mingling with the cheap floral perfume Chloe always wore. A perfume I had actually bought for her last Christmas. I was holding a lukewarm cup of black coffee, my eyes fixed firmly on the double doors of the pediatric intensive care unit. My best friend Chloe was sitting next to me on the uncomfortable plastic chairs, weeping softly into her hands. My husband David was pacing the floor in front of us, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, playing the role of the concerned honorary uncle to absolute perfection. I had known Chloe since our days at Spelman College. We shared dorm rooms, graduation stages, and what I thought were our deepest secrets. When her daughter Zuri was diagnosed with a severe blood disorder just a few days ago, my heart broke for her. Zuri was a sweet girl. I had attended every single one of her birthday parties. I had bought her first bicycle. I had held her when she cried over scraped knees, genuinely believing I was the cool, supportive aunt. Chloe always played the role of the struggling single mother, a woman who just could never catch a break in life. And I, the successful friend with the corporate empire, was always there to catch her when she fell. I paid for her groceries, I bought Zuri's school supplies, and I listened to her complain about the terrible men she dated. When the doctors told us Zuri needed a direct transfusion of a highly specific and rare blood type, David immediately volunteered to be tested. I remember looking at him with so much pride in that moment. I thought I had married the most generous, selfless man in Georgia, a man who would bleed for my best friend's child without a second thought. The heavy double doors finally swung open, pulling me violently out of my thoughts. Dr. Evans stepped out into the waiting room, still wearing his blue scrubs, holding a metal clipboard tightly against his chest. He looked exhausted, but there was a distinct look of relief on his face. David immediately stopped pacing and rushed over to him. Chloe jumped up from her chair, clutching my arm so tightly, her acrylic nails dug sharply into my skin. I offered her a reassuring smile, ready to hear the good news that my husband could save this little girl's life. "We have the human leukocyte antigen test results," Dr. Evans said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty, sterile corridor. "The direct transfusion for 9-year-old Zuri is a go." Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sob of relief, burying her face in my shoulder. I patted her back, feeling a massive wave of gratitude wash over me. "Thank God," I whispered into the quiet room. Dr. Evans looked down at his chart, then looked up directly at David, offering a professional, clinical smile. "David's markers are a flawless match. It is incredibly fortunate. Because the genetic markers are perfectly aligned, the child's body will not reject her biological father's blood." The hallway went completely, terrifyingly silent. The only sound left in the world was the dull humming of the vending machine down the hall. I stood there, totally frozen. My brain scrambled to process the words, trying to arrange them into a sentence that made a different kind of sense. Biological father. The paper cup slipped from my numb fingers. It hit the linoleum floor with a wet, heavy slap, splashing dark coffee across my beige heels and the hem of my designer trousers. I did not feel the heat of the liquid on my skin. I did not feel anything at all. I slowly turned my head to look at David. He was staring at the doctor, his handsome face suddenly drained of all color. He did not look confused. He did not ask the doctor to repeat himself or correct a massive medical mistake. He just looked caught. He looked like a man who had just watched his decade-long lie collapse in real time. I turned to look at Chloe, the woman who had slept on my couch, eaten at my dining table, and cried on my shoulder for years. She was not looking at the doctor in shock. She was staring at the floor, slowly stepping away from me, her hands twisting the fabric of her sweater nervously. She knew. She had always known. Before I could even form a single syllable to ask them what was going on, Chloe burst into loud, theatrical tears. She threw her hands up in the air, immediately playing the victim exactly as she always did whenever she was backed into a corner. "It is just a rare blood-type coincidence," Chloe wailed, her voice echoing shrilly down the corridor. "Nia, please do not do this. Please do not make my daughter's tragedy about your own insecurities. My baby is in there fighting for her life, and you are going to stand here and be jealous over a medical mix-up." I stared at her, my vision narrowing until she was the only thing I could see. The sheer audacity of her words felt like a second, much harder slap to the face. She was actively gaslighting me in the middle of a pediatric ward, trying to make me look like a crazy, insecure wife. I looked back at David, desperately waiting for him to shut her down, waiting for him to explain the medical impossibility. Instead, his entire demeanor shifted. The brief flash of guilt in his eyes vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, defensive anger. He took an aggressive step toward me, towering over my frame to intimidate me. "Are you really going to do this right now?" He snarled, his voice low and dripping with venom. He violently shoved past me, his shoulder hitting mine hard enough to knock me off balance. "You are heartless, Nia. A child is dying and all you care about is your own ego." He snatched the donor consent forms right out of the doctor's hand, hastily signing his name on the dotted lines with angry, jagged strokes. I stood there humiliated and entirely broken as the hospital nurses and the doctor watched us with incredibly uncomfortable expressions. "I am going to save my daughter," David declared loudly, making absolutely sure everyone in the vicinity heard his heroic statement. He pointed a demanding finger directly at me. "Get her out of here. She is causing a disturbance and stressing out the mother of the patient." Before I could even open my mouth to defend myself against the absolute insanity of his accusation, a hospital security guard stepped forward from his post by the elevators. He placed a firm, heavy hand on my elbow. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to leave the ward," the guard said quietly. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. My years of crisis management training immediately kicked in, burying the shattered, betrayed wife and bringing forward the cold, calculated executive. I pulled my arm away from the guard with a sharp jerk, smoothed down the front of my tailored blazer, and walked out of the double doors without looking back. The heavy, humid Atlanta heat hit me like a physical blow the second I walked out into the concrete parking garage. My footsteps echoed loudly as I made my way to my black Mercedes-Benz. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door firmly, sealing myself inside the quiet leather-lined interior. I sat there for exactly 1 minute, staring blankly at the leather-wrapped steering wheel. 10 years of marriage. A whole decade of building a life together. 10 years of dealing with my mother-in-law's constant snide remarks about my ambition and my supposed inability to give her a grandchild. Mama Pearl was a woman who weaponized religion to control everyone around her, and she had always made it clear I was never good enough for her precious son. 10 years of dealing with his lazy sister's endless financial demands. Tasha was constantly begging for handouts while openly criticizing my corporate career. I endured all of it, every single insult and sacrifice, while he was secretly playing house with my absolute best friend. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out my work laptop. I still did not shed a single tear. Crying was a luxury for victims, and I absolutely refused to be one. I opened the laptop and quickly tethered it to my mobile phone's hotspot. As the chief executive officer of my firm, I provided premium executive health insurance for my entire family. David was on my primary policy. I opened the web browser and navigated directly to the insurance portal's administrative login page. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in my executive credentials. The two-factor authentication code popped up on my phone screen and I entered the 6 digits without a second's hesitation. The portal loaded slowly, displaying my name at the top right corner of the dashboard. I clicked on the tab labeled Family and Dependents. The screen refreshed with a bright flash of white. There, listed neatly under David's profile, was a name I recognized instantly. Zuri Hayes. Date of birth exactly 9 years ago. Relationship to subscriber-dependent child. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on the detailed enrollment history, my eyes scanning the digital records. She had not been added recently. Zuri had been listed on David's premium dental and health plans for the last 5 years. He had been quietly routing my own company benefits to pay for his secret child's medical care, hiding it deep within our corporate group policy documents where he thought I would be too busy to ever look. I closed the laptop with a soft, definitive click. The betrayal I had just uncovered was not a moment of weakness or a drunken mistake. It was a highly calculated long-term financial and emotional strategy. They had both looked me in the eye, eaten my food, slept in my guest room, and spent my hard-earned money, all while laughing at my utter stupidity behind my back. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line for my personal wealth manager. The phone rang only twice before he answered. "Good afternoon, Nia," he said cheerfully. "Cancel all secondary credit cards attached to my accounts." I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Lock down the joint investment portfolios immediately. Freeze everything that has his name attached to it." "Understood," he replied instantly, sensing the gravity in my tone. "I will handle it right now." I hung up the phone and looked up at the hospital building towering over the parking garage. David and Chloe thought they had won. They thought they could humiliate me, cast me aside, and continue living off my success. But that was only the beginning. If they wanted to play ruthless games with my life, I was going to rewrite the rules entirely. They had absolutely no idea what kind of war they had just started. The drive from the hospital to my estate in Buckhead was a blur of towering Georgia pine trees and massive iron-gated driveways. I pulled my black Mercedes into the circular driveway of the home I had purchased entirely with my own money. When I bought this 6-bedroom house, David told everyone in his social circle that his financial advising firm had just closed a record-breaking year. I let him take the full credit because I thought a successful marriage meant protecting your husband's pride at all costs. I was an absolute fool. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door, expecting the quiet sanctuary of an empty house. My nerves were completely frayed, and all I wanted was the silence of my own home. Instead, the sharp clinking of crystal glasses echoed loudly from the formal living room. I smelled it before I even rounded the corner. My vintage silver oak Cabernet Sauvignon. The specific bottles I kept locked away in the temperature-controlled wine cellar in the basement. I walked into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. My mother-in-law, Mama Pearl, was seated directly in the center of my custom white velvet sofa, holding a large glass of dark red wine. Her designer church hat was resting carelessly on the imported marble coffee table. Sprawled out comfortably on the matching love seat was David's younger sister, Tasha. Tasha was wearing her expensive silk pajamas at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, casually admiring her freshly filled acrylic nails in the afternoon light. Neither of them looked surprised to see me standing there. They did not offer any sympathy or ask about the sick child fighting for her life in the hospital. Mama Pearl took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine and set the heavy crystal glass down on a gold coaster. "David called me," she said, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "He told me exactly what happened at the hospital with the test results." I stood there in my coffee-stained trousers, waiting for the apology that I foolishly thought a mother would offer on behalf of her cheating, deceitful son. Instead, Mama Pearl adjusted the oversized pearl necklace resting against her collarbone and looked at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered judgment. "I have known about the child for years, Nia," she said flatly, not even blinking. "Do not stand there looking so shocked. A mother knows everything about her son, and if you ask me, you only have yourself to blame for this entire situation." The sheer audacity of her words felt like a physical blow to my chest, knocking the wind completely out of my lungs. I stared at the woman I had bought luxury Caribbean cruises for. The woman whose church I had anonymously donated thousands of dollars to just to keep her in the pastor's good graces and maintain her pristine social standing in the congregation. If you were not so busy building your little public relations empire, you would have noticed what was happening right under your nose. Mama Pearl continued her tone, rising into a self-righteous preach. You are a married woman, but you act like a single corporate shark. You care more about your tailored suits and your high-profile board meetings than you care about providing my son with a proper heir. David is a successful traditional man. He needed a legacy. If you had just done your duty as a wife and given him a child instead of chasing magazine covers, he would not have had to look outside his own home to find a real family. Before I could even process the misogynistic venom spilling from her mouth, Tasha let out a loud, arrogant scoff from the love seat. Exactly, Tasha chimed in, waving her freshly manicured hand dismissively in the air. A man needs a real woman, Nia. Somebody like Chloe who actually knows how to nurture and make a house feel like a warm home. Chloe knows how to cater to a man. She knows how to cook his favorite meals and listen to his problems without checking her phone every 5 minutes. You just know how to order people around and check your emails. I slowly turned my gaze to Tasha, locking eyes with my fiercely entitled sister-in-law. This was the same 32-year-old woman who absolutely refused to hold down a steady job. The same woman who was currently living rent-free in a luxury 2-bedroom condo in the heart of downtown Atlanta, overlooking the city skyline. A high-rise condo that was fully owned by my corporate real estate holding company, which I had specifically purchased to keep her from being continually evicted from her previous apartments. I paid her utility bills every single month. I paid her expensive building maintenance fees. I even paid for the very acrylic nails she was currently waving in my face to disrespect me. And here she was, sitting in my living room, drinking my expensive wine and openly praising my husband's mistress. They were not just defending David out of blind family loyalty, they were thoroughly enjoying this moment. They were absolutely reveling in my sudden humiliation. For a decade, I had been the solid financial backbone of this entire family. I had elevated their social status, giving them direct access to circles of wealth and influence they could never have reached on their own. But behind my back, they had deeply resented me for every ounce of my success. They hated the fact that I was the primary provider. They had clearly formed a unified front with Chloe treating her like the actual beloved wife. I suddenly remembered all the holidays Chloe spent sitting right here in this very room, laughing warmly with Mama Pearl in the kitchen, while I was upstairs answering emergency work emails. They had been playing house right under my roof, treating me like an automated teller machine they could merely tolerate for the sake of luxury and convenience. Every single instinct inside of my body screamed to kick them out right then and there. My blood was boiling so hot, I could hear my own heartbeat thumping aggressively in my ears. I wanted to call my private security team and have them both physically dragged out onto the manicured front lawn. But I forced myself to remember the ruthless crisis management strategies I used every single day to systematically destroy my corporate rivals. You never show your enemy your hand when they already think they have won the game. You let them get comfortable. You let them get sloppy. You let them believe they have completely broken your spirit, so they leave their defenses completely unguarded. I took a deep, shaky breath and forced my shoulders to slump forward in defeat. I let my eyes fill with genuine-looking tears blinking rapidly so they would spill over my cheeks and ruin my makeup. I dropped my heavy designer tote bag onto the hardwood floor and covered my face with both of my hands, letting out a pathetic-sounding sob that echoed loudly through the large room. "You are right, Mama Pearl," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly under the emotional weight of my theatrical performance. I lowered my head and let my shoulders shake rhythmically. I have been a terrible selfish wife. I was so caught up in my career and making money that I severely neglected the most important man in my life. I pushed David away. I practically forced him into her arms because I was not woman enough to give him what he truly needed. Mama Pearl let out a highly satisfied hum, leaning back comfortably against the velvet cushions. "It is about time you accepted some real accountability," she declared, crossing her arms over her chest. "You need to pray on this, Nia. You need to get down on your knees and ask God for the grace to forgive my son and accept that innocent little girl into our lives. I will. I sobbed loudly, peeking through my fingers, just in time to see Tasha rolling her eyes with an incredibly smug, victorious smile. I will do much better. I promise you both. I am going to do whatever it takes to fix this marriage and make David happy. Tasha stood up, stretching lazily and smoothing down the wrinkles in her expensive silk pajamas. Well, I am truly glad you are finally seeing reality, she said casually, walking toward the grand foyer. This whole intense family drama is really stressing me out, and I desperately need some retail therapy to clear my head. She grabbed her designer leather purse from the entryway table, a purse I had personally bought for her 30th birthday. She strutted past me without offering a second glance, fully believing I was completely broken and safely subdued for the foreseeable future. The heavy mahogany front door clicked shut softly behind her, leaving me standing alone in the living room with my quietly judging mother-in-law. I kept my head bowed respectfully, pretending to aggressively wipe away my flowing tears with the back of my hand. I counted the seconds in my head. Exactly 2 minutes later, the screen of my mobile phone lit up brightly in the palm of my hand, buzzing with an urgent alert. A notification from American Express popped up on the high-resolution screen. It was an alert for a $4,500 transaction attempt at a high-end designer boutique over at Phipps Plaza Mall. The fake tears instantly vanished from my face, drying up in a fraction of a second. I stood up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back and letting my spine snap directly into its usual confident posture. I looked down at the digital notification glowing on the glass screen, and a cold, deeply ruthless smile spread across my lips. I tapped the screen, dialed the direct emergency line to my wealth manager, and lifted the phone to my ear while looking directly at the wall behind Mama Pearl. Cancel all secondary cards immediately, I commanded, my voice dropping the fragile broken act entirely and returning to the icy commanding tone of a chief executive officer. Right now. I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the heavy oak desk. The silence in my home office was deafening. I walked over to the thick wooden double doors and turned the brass lock until it clicked securely into place. No one was getting in. David was still at the hospital recovering from his heroic blood draw, and my mother-in-law was likely already on her way to her next church committee meeting, completely convinced she had successfully broken my spirit. They had given me the exact opening I needed. As a crisis management executive, I spend my life cleaning up the financial and public relations disasters of highly wealthy individuals. I know exactly how powerful men hide their dirty secrets. I know how they launder money through shell companies, and I know exactly where they leave their digital fingerprints. For 10 years, I had respected the boundaries of David's financial advising firm. I let him manage our joint investments because I believed a marriage required absolute trust. I was about to weaponize those 10 years of access. I woke up my massive desktop computer and fired up my 3 high-resolution monitors. I did not bother looking at our standard checking accounts. People who live double lives do not leave a trail in their daily checking accounts. I bypassed our personal banking portal entirely and logged directly into the secure federal tax document database using the joint credentials David and I shared for our certified public accountant. I pulled up our tax returns from the last 5 years and began running them through my firm's proprietary auditing software. It took less than 20 minutes for the software to flag a massive, glaring inconsistency. Tucked away deep in the Schedule C attachments of David's filings was an obscure limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware. The company was named Horizon Vista Holdings, LLC. I had never heard that name in my entire life. David had never mentioned a Horizon Vista Holdings in any of our late-night discussions about our financial portfolio. I copied the LLC name and ran it through a premium background check service my firm uses to vet potential corporate clients. The search results populated almost instantly. David was listed as the sole managing member of Horizon Vista Holdings. But what made my blood turn completely to ice was the list of assets legally registered under that corporate entity. There was only one asset. It was a piece of residential real estate. I clicked on the property address and a sickening wave of realization washed over me. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom suburban home in Marietta. I did not just recognize the address, I knew the floor plan. I knew the color of the kitchen cabinets. I knew exactly where the sun hit the back patio in the late afternoon. It was Chloe's house. 3 years ago, Chloe had tearfully called me to announce she had finally found a stable home for her and Zuri. She claimed she found a private landlord who was incredibly generous and willing to rent the expensive property to her at a steeply discounted rate. I remembered bringing a bottle of expensive champagne to her housewarming party. I remembered hugging her in that spacious kitchen, telling her how proud I was of her for finally getting her life together. David had been standing right next to me holding his glass of champagne and smiling warmly at his mistress in the house he had secretly bought for her. The rage inside me was no longer a burning fire. It had compressed into something freezing cold and incredibly dense. I pulled up the public property records for the Marietta house. Horizon Vista Holdings had purchased the property 3 years ago for $400,000. The records showed a massive initial down payment of $200,000 wired directly at closing. $200,000 in liquid cash is not something you can easily hide from a spouse, even if you are a successful financial advisor. That kind of money leaves a massive paper trail. I opened another secure tab and began hunting for the origin of that wire transfer. I cross-referenced the date of the home purchase with every single investment portfolio David managed for us. I traced the money through 3 different internal bank transfers designed specifically to confuse an auditor. But I was not just an auditor. I was a betrayed wife. The breadcrumbs finally led me to a specific joint investment account held at a private brokerage firm. I stared at the account number on the screen, and my heart completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. I felt a physical pain in my chest so sharp it stole my breath. That specific account was not built on David's financial advising commissions. It was funded by my late father's life insurance policy. My father was a hard-working postal worker who sorted mail for 35 years. He worked brutal shifts pulling overtime every single holiday so he could leave a legacy for his only daughter. When he died suddenly of a massive heart attack 5 years ago, the grief completely consumed me. The life insurance payout was the very last thing my father ever gave me. It was the physical manifestation of his sweat, his exhausted hands, and his unconditional love. When I received the check, David had held me while I cried. He gently convinced me to put the money into a high-yield joint investment account, promising me he would aggressively manage it so my father's legacy would grow and eventually fund our future children's college tuitions. Instead, my husband had systematically drained $200,000 of a dead man's hard-earned money. He took the money my father literally worked himself into an early grave to save, and he used it to buy a luxury suburban house for a woman he was sleeping with behind my back. He used my father's legacy to put a roof over the head of a child he created with my college best friend. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the edges of my heavy oak desk so hard my knuckles turned completely white. The sheer demonic level of this betrayal was almost too large for my brain to process. David had not just cheated on me. He had financially violated my family. He had desecrated the memory of the only man who had ever truly loved and protected me. I opened my eyes and stared at the glowing monitors. There would be no mercy. None. I was going to dismantle his entire life brick by miserable brick. I was going to leave him with absolutely nothing. Suddenly, the harsh ringing of my mobile phone shattered the heavy silence in the office. The caller identification displayed Tasha's face. The timing was absolutely perfect. I swiped the screen to accept the call and put it on speakerphone, laying the device flat on my desk. "Nia, what the hell is wrong with your credit card?" Tasha screamed at the top of her lungs. Her voice echoed loudly, accompanied by the chaotic background noise of a busy shopping mall. "I am standing at the checkout counter at a designer boutique right now, and the cashier just loudly told me the card was declined. Do you have any idea how completely humiliating this is? My friends are standing right here watching me. You need to call the bank immediately and fix this before I tell my brother how you are treating his family." I listened to her incredibly entitled screeching, leaning back slowly in my ergonomic leather chair. The contrast between her pathetic material complaints and the massive financial crimes I had just uncovered on my computer was almost comical. The card is not broken, Tasha. I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. It is completely permanently cancelled. Do not ever call this number again. I tapped the red button on the screen, cutting off her frantic shrieking mid-sentence. I tossed the phone to the side of my desk, not caring in the slightest about the absolute public meltdown she was currently having in the middle of the mall. Let her cry over a handbag, while I prepared to take back my entire empire. Just as I turned my attention back to the investment portfolios, a loud chime sounded from my desktop speakers. A new email had just arrived in my priority corporate inbox. I clicked the mail icon, watching the message load onto the screen. It was an email forwarded directly from David. The original sender was the billing department of Emory University Hospital. I opened the attached document. It was an itemized preliminary invoice for Zurith's highly specialized uninsured medical treatments and the direct blood transfusion prep. The total amount due was $250,000. David had added a brief demanding message at the top of the forwarded email. Nia, I know you are upset, but this is life or death. The hospital requires a massive deposit for these out-of-network procedures. Forward this invoice to your corporate accounting department and have them pay it from your business account immediately. We can discuss our marital issues later. Do the right thing. I sat there staring at the absolute peak of his audacity. He had stolen my inheritance to buy his mistress a house he had lied to me for a decade, and now he wanted my corporate business account to pay $250,000 to save the child he had hidden from me. He genuinely believed I was a compliant, obedient cash cow who would just roll over and fund his entire secret life out of some misguided sense of duty. I hit the print button, sending the massive hospital invoice to my office printer. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my thick leather-bound contacts book. It was time to stop playing the victim and start acting like the ruthless corporate executive they all despised. I flipped to a specific page and dialed the direct cellular number of the most aggressive forensic accountant in the state of Georgia. The war had officially begun. The very next morning, the polished glass doors of my executive suite burst open. My assistant Sarah was trailing behind, desperately trying to stop the intruder, but Tasha had already marched right past the reception desk. She was wearing massive designer sunglasses indoors and carrying the exact same leather purse she had purchased yesterday, right before I froze the accounts. Her face was twisted into a furious, ugly scowl. She slammed her hands down on my mahogany desk, scattering a few of my meticulously arranged file folders. I simply raised a hand, signaling for Sarah to leave us alone and close the door. "You have completely lost your mind!" "Nia?" Tasha screamed, her voice echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. "How dare you cancel my credit card and leave me stranded at the mall? I had to call my mother to come pick me up like a teenager. You are so incredibly bitter and jealous that my brother finally found a real woman who appreciates him that you are taking it out on me." I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers together. I did not say a word. I just let her dig her own grave. "David is furious." Tasha continued, taking my silence for weakness. "He told Mama Pearl everything. He is going to divorce you, Nia. He is going to drag you through the courts and take half of this stupid company, half of that giant house in Buckhead, and half of every single dollar you have ever made. You are going to be left with absolutely nothing while he and Chloe build a beautiful life together." I slowly opened my top desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper. I placed it flat on the desk and slid it across the smooth wood until it rested right beneath her perfectly manicured hands. "Read it," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave into the cold, authoritative register I reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. Tasha snatched the paper off the desk, rolling her eyes aggressively. As her eyes scanned the bold printed words at the top of the page, her confident sneer slowly melted into a look of absolute confusion and then sheer panic. "This is an eviction notice," she stammered, looking up at me in disbelief. "You cannot evict me from my own home. David gave me that condo. He said I could live there as long as I wanted." "David lied?" I replied smoothly, standing up from my chair and smoothing down my skirt. David does not own that luxury high-rise condo. A corporate holding company named Obsidian Properties owns it. And as the sole managing director of Obsidian Properties, I am officially terminating your month-to-month tenancy due to severe financial delinquency. That condo is owned by my LLC, Tasha. You are not family. You are a squatter. The reality of her situation hit her all at once. The free rent, the luxury amenities, the prestigious downtown address, all of it was vanishing right before her eyes. The panic in her chest quickly turned into a blind, explosive rage. "You vindictive, barren witch!" Tasha shrieked. She lunged across the wide mahogany desk, her hands outstretched, aiming directly for my face with her sharp acrylic nails. She never even made it halfway across the wood. My head of corporate security, Derek, had been standing quietly in the corner of the office the entire time, completely hidden by the shadow of the large indoor ficus tree. He stepped forward with lightning speed, grabbing Tasha by her upper arms and effortlessly pulling her back. She thrashed wildly, kicking her expensive heels in the air and screaming obscenities, but Derek held her in a vice grip. "Assaulting a corporate officer on company property is a felony, Tasha," I said calmly, walking around the desk to look her directly in the eye. "I was going to give you 24 hours to vacate the premises, but since you just attempted to physically attack me, you have exactly 1 hour. Derek is going to escort you to the condo right now. You will pack whatever fits into 2 suitcases and you will hand over the keys. Anything left behind will be donated to charity." Tasha began to sob, begging and threatening me in the exact same breath, but I simply nodded at Derek. He marched her out of my office through the executive bullpen and directly into the private elevator. I followed closely behind them, fully intending to oversee every single second of her miserable departure. The drive to the downtown luxury high-rise was completely silent, except for Tasha's quiet, angry sniffling in the back of the corporate SUV. When we arrived at the building, Derek escorted her up to the penthouse level. I stood by the door watching coldly as she frantically threw her expensive clothes, shoes, and designer makeup into 2 large suitcases. She was crying hysterically, mourning the loss of the affluent lifestyle she had done absolutely nothing to earn. "Time is up," I announced, checking my watch. "Let us go." Derek grabbed the 2 heavy suitcases and directed her toward the elevator. When the polished metal doors opened on the ground floor lobby, the scene was absolutely perfect. The lobby was packed. Several of Tasha's high society friends, the same women she constantly bragged to about her wealthy, independent lifestyle, were sitting in the plush waiting area. They had clearly been waiting for her to come down for their weekly expensive brunch date. They all stood up in shock as Tasha stumbled out of the elevator, completely red-faced and sobbing, followed closely by my massive security chief carrying her luggage. "Tasha, what is going on?" one of her friends asked, looking back and forth between Tasha and me. "Are you moving?" "She is being evicted," I answered loudly, ensuring my voice carried across the marble lobby. The building concierge and several other wealthy residents stopped to watch the spectacle. "I have subsidized her lifestyle for the last 3 years, but unfortunately my charity has run out. She is officially vacating the premises." The humiliation on Tasha's face was absolute. Her friends looked at her in stunned silence, suddenly realizing that the glamorous, independent woman they admired was actually just a broke freeloader living entirely off her sister-in-law's generosity. Tasha let out a loud guttural scream of pure embarrassment and rage. Completely losing whatever shred of dignity she had left, she lunged at me again, right there in the middle of the crowded lobby. She swung her heavy designer purse wildly, aiming for my head. Derek smoothly stepped in front of me, intercepting the blow and pushing her firmly back toward the revolving glass doors. "Do not touch me!" Tasha screamed wildly, pushing her way out of the building. She grabbed her suitcases from Derek and dragged them roughly onto the busy downtown sidewalk. I stood safely inside the air-conditioned lobby, watching through the glass. Instead of calling a cab or trying to salvage the situation, Tasha immediately pulled out her phone. I watched her wipe her running mascara, adjust her hair, and hit the record button. She was going live on Instagram. I opened the social media app on my own phone and tapped on her profile. Sure enough, there she was broadcasting to her thousands of followers standing on the sidewalk with her luggage, acting like a complete martyr. You guys, I am literally shaking right now, Tasha cried into her phone camera, forcing fresh tears to stream down her face. My brother is at the hospital dealing with a massive family tragedy, and my evil bougie sister-in-law Nia just kicked me out onto the street. She sent her massive security guards to physically drag me out of my own apartment just because she is incredibly jealous and bitter. She literally assaulted me. Please share this video. This woman is a monster and everyone in Atlanta needs to know the truth. I watched the viewer count on her live stream climb rapidly. Comments were pouring in, offering her sympathy and calling me every terrible name in the book. She thought she had just executed a brilliant public relations maneuver by controlling the narrative and making me the villain. She completely forgot what I do for a living. I walked directly over to the main concierge desk. The building manager, an older gentleman who had always appreciated the generous holiday bonuses I gave him, was standing there looking incredibly apologetic about the scene. I need a digital copy of the lobby security footage from the last 10 minutes, I told him, handing him my business card. Specifically, the camera angle showing her attempting to physically assault me with her purse. Send it directly to my corporate email address. Right away, Mom. He nodded quickly, typing on his computer terminal. Within 2 minutes, my phone buzzed with the video file attachment. I did not post it on my own page. I sent the high-definition video file directly to the administrators of the 3 biggest urban gossip blogs in Atlanta, along with a copy of the legal eviction notice and the LLC property deed proving I was the rightful owner. By the time Tasha finished her tearful 20-minute Instagram live broadcast, playing the ultimate victim, the real footage of her swinging her purse at me and being escorted out as a squatter had already gone completely viral. Her comments section instantly flipped from overwhelming sympathy to brutal public mockery. She was instantly exposed not just to her immediate friend group, but to the entire city. The leech had been successfully detached. Now it was time to handle the matriarch. The heavy mahogany front door opened later that evening, bringing with it the faint smell of hospital sanitizer and expensive men's cologne. I was sitting in the formal dining room nursing a glass of sparkling water when David finally walked in. He looked perfectly disheveled, having expertly loosened his silk tie and unbuttoned his collar to present the image of a weary noble father who had just spent the entire day sacrificing his own blood for a sick child. He let out a long, heavy sigh specifically designed to elicit my sympathy. But he was not alone. Right behind him, stepping into the foyer with her chin held high and her designer handbag clutched tightly in front of her, was Mama Pearl. She had clearly rushed back to his side the moment he called her, entirely ready to tag team me after my supposed emotional breakdown earlier that afternoon. They walked into the dining room, taking a seat directly across from me at the long wooden table. It felt exactly like a corporate ambush. They had rehearsed this. "Nia, we need to have a serious family meeting." David began, his voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet tone of manufactured empathy. He reached across the polished wood and attempted to place his hand over mine. I smoothly pulled my hand back and grabbed my water glass, denying him the physical connection he was trying to use to manipulate me. He cleared his throat, ignoring the rejection and pressing forward. Today was incredibly hard on all of us. But seeing Zuri in that hospital bed fighting for her life gave me a tremendous amount of clarity. She is my flesh and blood, Nia. I cannot just walk away from her, and I know you do not want me to. You have a good heart. Mama Pearl nodded vigorously in agreement, her oversized church hat bobbing with every self-righteous movement. That is exactly right, she chimed in, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. The Lord works in highly mysterious ways, Nia. Sometimes he uses our deepest trials to build a stronger foundation. David made a mistake in the past, but that little girl is completely innocent. She needs a stable 2-parent household and a proper, loving environment to recover. I stared at the two of them, my mind racing with the sheer volume of their delusion. They were sitting in my house, drinking my water, breathing my air, and attempting to gaslight me into accepting the physical evidence of my husband's 10-year affair. David reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He untied the string and slid a crisp stack of legal documents across the smooth dining table, stopping right in front of me. I looked down at the bold black font printed at the very top of the first page. It read, "Petition for Step-Parent Adoption. If you want to save this marriage, you will adopt David's child and raise her as your own." Mama Pearl demanded, dropping all pretenses of gentle persuasion. Her tone was absolute steel. "It is the Christian thing to do, Nia. You have spent your entire adult life chasing corporate titles and ignoring your duties at home. God has graciously given you a second chance to be a real mother. You will sign those papers, you will bring that child into this beautiful home you paid for, and you will help my son raise his legacy." David leaned forward, nodding solemnly as if his mother had just delivered a profound sermon. "We can be a real family, Nia. I will forgive you for evicting my sister today, because I know you were just acting out of shock and hurt. We can put all of this behind us." Chloe understands her place. She knows she cannot provide the kind of elite life and education that we can offer Zuri. Once the adoption is finalized, we will give Chloe a modest stipend to step away. You get the child you always struggled to have, and I get to keep my family completely intact. It is a win for everyone. The audacity of his proposal was so astronomically high, it almost defied human logic. He wanted me to legally bind myself to the child he created with my best friend. He wanted me to assume full financial and legal responsibility for Zuri, so he could play the wealthy, respectable family man without actually having to spend a dime of his own money. He was trying to use my own wealth to clean up the absolute worst mistake of his entire life, while simultaneously framing it as a generous favor to me. Every fiber of my being wanted to flip the heavy dining table, pick up the crystal vase in the center, and smash it completely over his head. I wanted to scream the truth about the secret house in Marietta and the stolen life insurance money, but I swallowed the burning acid in my throat. Anger is an incredibly useless emotion when you are trying to execute a flawless corporate takedown. I looked down at the adoption papers, my hands trembling just enough to sell the performance. I let a single tear slip down my cheek, ensuring the overhead chandelier caught the moisture on my face. "This is incredibly overwhelming," I whispered, my voice shaking perfectly. I looked up at Mama Pearl, my eyes wide and entirely submissive. "I want to do the right thing, Mama Pearl. I really do. I want to save my marriage, and I want to be a good Christian wife. But legally, adopting a child is a massive permanent commitment. I cannot just sign this right now. I need to take this into my prayer closet. I need time to pray on it and seek genuine guidance from the Lord before I put my name on a binding legal document." Mama Pearl smiled a deeply satisfied, incredibly smug smile. She believed she had completely won. She had successfully invoked religion to crush my boundaries, and she fully expected me to cave within the next 24 hours. "Take the night to pray, Nia," she said softly, standing up from the table and smoothing down her skirt. "The Lord will speak to you, and he will tell you that a woman's true purpose is to stand by her husband no matter what trials the devil throws in their path." David offered me a sympathetic, highly patronizing smile. "Take all the time you need tonight," he said softly. "I am going to head back to the hospital and check on Zuri. I will sleep in the guest room when I get back, so you can have your space to process everything." I watched them walk out of the dining room, maintaining my fragile weeping posture, until I heard the heavy front door open and close. The absolute second the deadbolt clicked into place, the tears stopped. I wiped my face, grabbed the adoption petition, and marched straight upstairs to my home office. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me and immediately booted up my encrypted laptop. I did not need to pray on anything. I needed to dig. Mama Pearl thought she was completely untouchable because she hid behind the polished pulpit of First Mount Zion Baptist Church. She served as the treasurer of the women's ministry, a highly prestigious position she constantly weaponized to judge and belittle other women in the congregation. She controlled the charity funds, the building repair budgets, and the massive tithes collected during their annual conventions. Arrogant people who think they have moral superiority always get incredibly sloppy with their paperwork. I picked up my phone and called Kendrick. Kendrick was the most ruthless forensic accountant in the city of Atlanta. He was an ex-federal auditor who now worked exclusively for high-net-worth clients, dealing with messy divorces and corporate embezzlement. He owed me a massive favor after my public relations firm successfully buried a scandal involving his own brother 2 years ago. Kendrick answered on the second ring. "Tell me who we are hunting today," he said, skipping the pleasantries entirely. "I need you to look into First Mount Zion Baptist Church," I instructed, my voice cold and incredibly focused. "Specifically the financial ledgers for the women's ministry over the last 18 months. My mother-in-law, Pearl Hayes, is the treasurer. She has sole signatory power over their building fund. I also need you to cross-reference any outgoing wire transfers from that church account with the internal accounts of David's firm, Apex Financial Solutions." "You want me to audit a church?" Kendrick asked, letting out a low whistle of appreciation. "That is incredibly messy, Nia. Religious nonprofits have layers of protection, but they also have to file public disclosures for massive capital movements. Give me 3 hours. If she moved a single dime out of place, I will find the digital footprint." I hung up the phone and spent the next 3 hours organizing the evidence I had already gathered. I created a secure digital dossier containing the proof of the Marietta House purchase, the stolen life insurance funds, and the hospital bills David tried to force my company to pay. Every single document was another nail in his coffin. But I needed something bigger. Infidelity and hiding assets would get me a highly favorable divorce settlement, but I did not just want a divorce, I wanted absolute total annihilation. Just after midnight, my secure email server pinged with an incoming encrypted file from Kendrick. I opened the message quickly. There was no text in the body of the email, just a single attached PDF document titled Bingo. I opened the document, and my eyes rapidly scanned the highlighted financial ledgers. Mama Pearl had not just made a clerical error. She was actively running a sophisticated financial crime right out of the church basement. 14 months ago, David's firm Apex Financial Solutions took a massive hit. He had aggressively over-leveraged several of his clients' portfolios on a highly risky tech startup that went completely bankrupt overnight. He was facing a massive margin call that would have instantly triggered a federal investigation and completely ruined his career. He needed cash immediately to cover the massive hole in his clients' accounts before the quarterly audit. Instead of coming to me and admitting he was a financial failure, he went to his mother. Kendrick had uncovered the wire transfer receipts. Mama Pearl had quietly authorized a transfer of $65,000 directly from the church's emergency building fund. She disguised the outgoing transaction as a charitable grant to a community development program. But the routing numbers did not lie. That money went straight into a shadow account controlled by Apex Financial Solutions, completely covering David's bad margin call. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glaring evidence of their staggering hypocrisy. Mama Pearl had sat in my dining room just hours ago preaching about Christian duty and moral integrity while she was actively stealing donation money from her own congregation to cover up her son's catastrophic failures. They had not just lied to me. They had stolen from widows, single mothers, and faithful churchgoers who gave their hard-earned 10% every single Sunday. David and Mama Pearl had committed highly documented, premeditated federal wire fraud. A slow, dark smile spread across my face. David thought he could use the legal system to trap me with an adoption petition. He had absolutely no idea that I was about to use the federal justice system to put him and his self-righteous mother in prison. The trap was fully set. Now it was time to drop the hammer. The following day was Sunday. In the African American community, Sunday dinner is not just a meal, it is an institution. It is a time for family to gather, share food, and pass judgment disguised as Christian concern. Despite the absolute chaos of the previous 2 days, David had the sheer audacity to invite his extended family over to our Buckhead estate. He wanted an audience. He wanted to fill my dining room with his aunts, uncles, and cousins to create a unified front of family pressure regarding the adoption of his secret child. I played the part of the gracious hostess to absolute perfection. I hired my favorite private catering company to prepare a massive feast of fried chicken, baked macaroni and cheese, collard greens, and candied yams. I wore a conservative floral dress, smiled warmly at his relatives, and poured sweet tea as if my entire world had not just imploded. At the head of the long dining table sat Mama Pearl. She was still wearing her extravagant purple church suit and a matching oversized hat that defied gravity. She was holding court, dominating the conversation with her usual booming, authoritative voice. She was putting on a masterclass in manipulation. "We just have to thank the Lord for David's incredibly generous heart," Mama Pearl announced, tapping her silver fork against her crystal water glass to command everyone's attention. She looked proudly down the table at her son. To step up and donate his precious blood to that poor little sick child. That takes a special kind of man, a true man of God. It is a tragedy about little Zuri, but the Lord uses our broken vessels to pour out his grace. A murmur of agreement rippled down the table. Aunt Beatrice nodded solemnly, while Uncle Marcus patted David firmly on the shoulder. David lowered his head in an act of profound fake humility, looking every bit the noble martyr. Mama Pearl then turned her sharp, judgmental gaze directly toward me. "And we are just praying that certain people in this family allow the Holy Spirit to soften their hardened hearts," she continued, her voice dripping with thinly veiled venom. "We are praying they realize that career ambitions and fancy corporate titles mean absolutely nothing if you refuse to build a family and do your Christian duty. A house is not a home without the laughter of a child. We just hope Nia finally steps up and opens her arms to the blessings God is trying to force into her life." The entire dining room fell silent. Every single pair of eyes shifted awkwardly toward me. They were all waiting for my reaction. They expected me to lower my head in shame, or perhaps burst into tears and agree to adopt the child right then and there. David was watching me closely, a smug, triumphant glimmer dancing in his eyes. I picked up my linen napkin and elegantly dabbed the corners of my mouth. I stood up from my chair, picking up a pristine white envelope I had placed perfectly next to my dinner plate. "You speak so beautifully about Christian duty, Mama Pearl," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "Your dedication to the church is truly inspiring. In fact, I wanted to give you something special to commemorate your leadership in the women's ministry." I walked slowly around the edge of the large wooden table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I stopped right behind Mama Pearl's chair. The heavy scent of her floral perfume mingled with the smell of roasted meats. I reached over her shoulder and placed the crisp white envelope directly onto her plate, right on top of her half-eaten serving of cornbread. "What is this?" she asked, looking at the envelope with a mixture of suspicion and greed. She probably thought it was a massive donation check from my company. "Just a token of my absolute appreciation for everything you do behind closed doors," I replied smoothly. "Go ahead and open it." Mama Pearl picked up the envelope and slid her perfectly manicured fingernail under the flap. She pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was the financial ledger Kendrick had sent me the night before. I had specifically highlighted the $65,000 wire transfer from the church building fund to David's failing financial firm in bright neon yellow ink. I watched her eyes scan the page. The transformation was instantaneous and absolutely spectacular. The smug, arrogant color completely drained from her face, leaving her skin looking like dull gray ash. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her hands began to tremble violently, causing the heavy paper to shake in her grip. I leaned down, resting my hands gently on the back of her wooden chair. I brought my lips right next to her ear, completely shielded from the view of the extended family. "If you ever mention the word adoption in my presence again," I whispered, my tone as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "If you ever mention my womb, my career, or my marriage again, this document goes straight to your pastor first thing tomorrow morning. And after he reads it, I am sending a certified copy directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You will go from being the head of the women's ministry to an inmate in a federal penitentiary. Do you understand me?" Mama Pearl let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She dropped the piece of paper onto her lap as if it had physically burned her fingers. She tried to swallow, but her throat was completely dry. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with absolute sheer terror. The powerful, self-righteous matriarch had instantly crumbled into a frightened old woman facing federal prison time. "Mama, is everything all right?" David asked, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. He noticed her sudden physical deterioration from the other end of the table. "What did Nia give you?" Mama Pearl did not answer him. She scrambled to stand up, pushing her heavy chair back so violently it nearly tipped over. She grabbed her designer purse with shaking hands, practically shoving the incriminating piece of paper deep into the leather bag. "I feel faint," she stammered, her voice breathless and entirely stripped of its usual booming authority. "I need to leave. I need to go home right now. My blood pressure is acting up." "What are you talking about?" David asked, standing up quickly. "We have not even served the dessert yet. What is going on?" "I have to go?" Mama Pearl repeated frantically, completely ignoring her son's questions. She did not look at him. She did not look at any of the confused aunts or uncles. Most importantly, she absolutely refused to make eye contact with me. She basically sprinted out of the dining room, her extravagant purple hat sitting completely crooked on her head. The heavy front door slammed shut a moment later, echoing loudly through the silent house. The extended family sat perfectly still, completely bewildered by the sudden chaotic departure. David stood at the head of the table, looking entirely lost. His ultimate weapon, his fiercely intimidating mother, had just abandoned him on the battlefield without firing a single shot. "She must have forgotten to take her medication," I said cheerfully, breaking the awkward silence. I picked up a silver serving spoon. "Who wants some peach cobbler?" The relatives nervously resumed eating, eager to move past the bizarre interruption. David, however, remained standing. He stared at me, his mind visibly racing as he tried to calculate exactly what I had said to his mother to cause such a massive panic. He opened his mouth to interrogate me, but he was interrupted by a sudden bright flash of light, illuminating his left wrist. David was wearing his expensive Apple smartwatch, a gift I had purchased for his last birthday. He had rested his hand on the dining table, and the screen brightly illuminated the surrounding wood. I was standing less than 3 feet away, giving me a perfect, unobstructed view of the digital display. A text message had just come through. The sender name displayed clearly in bold white letters, Chloe. Because David had set his notifications to display full message previews, the entire text was completely visible on the glowing square screen. "When are you leaving that barren woman? We need more money for the hospital. She wants $50,000 up front for the specialized care. Get her to sign the adoption papers so we can secure the bag and be done with her." I read the words quickly, committing every single despicable syllable to my memory. Secure the bag. That was what my decade-long marriage was to them. I was not a wife. I was a corporate bank account. They were actively plotting to drain my finances right up until the moment they cast me aside. David's eyes darted down to his wrist. He saw the message. He immediately panicked, slapping his right hand over the watch face to hide the screen. He snapped his head up to look at me, pure guilt written all over his handsome face. He knew I was close enough to read it. He knew exactly what had just popped up. I simply looked at him, maintaining perfect, unblinking eye contact. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass of water at him. I gave him a slow, chilling smile that completely froze the blood in his veins. "Is Chloe doing all right?" I asked, my voice dripping with sugary, sweet innocence. "Tell her I am praying for her completely." David swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He slowly sat back down in his chair, looking exactly like a man who finally realized he was trapped in a cage with an apex predator. His mother had fled. His sister was evicted. His mistress was demanding money he did not actually have. And his wife, the woman he thought he could easily manipulate, was smiling at him with the cold, dead eyes of an executioner. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had planned. Now it was time to isolate him completely and set the stage for the ultimate public slaughter. The extended family practically tripped over themselves, rushing to the front door. The awkward tension in the dining room had become completely suffocating, and none of them wanted to be caught in the crossfire of whatever was happening between David and me. Within 10 minutes, the house was entirely empty except for the two of us. The silence was incredibly heavy, broken only by the hum of the central air conditioning. David stood at the end of the long wooden table, his hands resting on the back of Mama Pearl's empty chair. He was trying desperately to regain the upper hand. His mother had run away, his mistress was demanding a massive payout, and he was rapidly losing control of his carefully constructed narrative. He decided that the best defense was an aggressive offense. He straightened his posture, puffing out his chest and narrowing his eyes at me. "We need to talk about what you did to Tasha," he demanded, his voice echoing sharply in the large room. "I got a frantic call from her yesterday. You brought your corporate security thugs to her apartment and threw her onto the street like a common criminal. You humiliated my sister in front of her friends Nia. What kind of vindictive monster does something like that while her husband is sitting in a hospital?" I looked down at the floor, letting my hair fall forward to shadow my face. I needed to execute the performance of a lifetime. I needed him to believe that the powerful chief executive officer he married had been completely broken by the threat of losing him. I took a sharp, ragged breath and let my knees buckle slightly. I sank down into one of the dining chairs, burying my face in my hands. I forced my shoulders to shake violently, letting out a loud, pathetic sob that sounded exactly like a woman who had reached the absolute end of her emotional rope. "I am so sorry, David," I wailed, my voice muffled by my hands. "I am so incredibly sorry. I just snapped. I completely lost my mind." David stopped abruptly. He had clearly expected a massive screaming match. He had expected me to defend my actions with cold corporate logic. Instead, he was watching the woman who usually intimidated him crumble into a weeping, submissive mess right before his eyes. He took a hesitant step toward me, his anger slowly being replaced by a sickening sense of arrogant curiosity. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone softening just a fraction. I dropped my hands from my face, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. My mascara was perfectly smudged. I was terrified, David. I cried, gripping the edges of the table. When the doctor came out and said you were the biological father, everything went black. I thought my entire world was ending. I thought Chloe was going to take you away from me. I thought you were going to pack your bags and leave me alone in this massive empty house. I reached out, grabbing his sleeve with trembling fingers. Tasha was just standing there in my living room, praising Chloe and telling me you needed a real woman. I felt so incredibly small. I felt like I had failed you as a wife. I took all of my fear and my jealousy out on your sister because I was too much of a coward to face the reality that I might lose my husband. Please, David, please do not leave me." David stared down at me. For a brief second, I thought he might see right through the theatrical display, but I knew his greatest weakness. His ego was a massive, bottomless pit. He desperately wanted to be the dominant man in our relationship. He wanted to be the king who could tame the ambitious corporate queen. Watching me beg for his affection completely intoxicated him. A slow, highly satisfied smile spread across his handsome face. He gently pulled his arm away from my frantic grip and reached out to stroke my hair. His touch made my skin crawl, but I leaned into his hand exactly like a desperate, loyal dog. "You should have come to me, Nia," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "You know I love you. But you cannot just lash out at my family because you feel insecure about your own shortcomings as a wife. Tasha is traumatized. You have a lot of damage to repair." "I will fix it," I promised, nodding enthusiastically. "I will make it up to everyone. I want to save our marriage, David. I want us to be a real family. And I want to start by taking care of the hospital bills." David's hand froze in my hair. His eyes widened slightly. "What did you just say?" I wiped my face, sitting up slightly straighter, but keeping my eyes locked on him with absolute devotion. "I saw the invoice you forwarded me. $250,000 for Zura's specialized treatments. I know your firm has been struggling slightly this quarter, and I do not want you to carry this massive financial burden alone. I will authorize a transfer from my corporate business account tomorrow morning. I will pay the hospital bill in full." David was completely speechless. The sheer greed washing over his face was absolutely blinding. He had walked into this house terrified that his secret life was going to bankrupt him. Now his wealthy wife was literally begging to write $250,000 check just to keep him around. He thought he was the greatest manipulator who had ever lived. That is incredibly generous of you, Nia, he finally managed to say, attempting to mask his overwhelming excitement with a look of solemn gratitude. It shows me that you are truly committed to making this work. I am committed, I replied softly. But I want to do more than just pay the medical bills. I want to repair your public image. I know that Apex Financial Solutions is celebrating its 10-year anniversary next week. David nodded, his posture stiffening slightly. The anniversary gala was supposed to be the highlight of his professional year. He had invited all of his high-net-worth clients, local politicians, and elite investors. It was an event designed to project massive success and stability. I want my public relations firm to fully sponsor and host the gala. I offered, my voice steady and supportive. We will move the event to the Grand Ballroom at the Four Seasons Hotel. I will handle the press, the catering, and the guest list. I will stand right by your side on that stage in front of every single investor in Atlanta. We will show them that despite any rumors, we are a completely united front. We will show them that Apex Financial is strong and that our family is unbreakable. David's ego completely took over. He did not question why the woman he had just profoundly betrayed was suddenly offering to throw him a massive, expensive party. He only saw the prestige. He saw the luxury of the Four Seasons. He saw the opportunity to parade his wealth in front of his peers, while secretly keeping his mistress funded on the side. He genuinely believed he had won everything. He leaned down and kissed me firmly on the forehead. "That is my girl," he whispered confidently. "I knew you would finally come to your senses. We are going to be unstoppable, Nia. Just you wait and see. I will handle all the arrangements," I promised, offering him a weak, compliant smile. "You just focus on resting tonight. You have had an incredibly long day," David agreed eagerly. He was so thoroughly pleased with himself that he practically strutted out of the dining room. He headed upstairs to the guest bedroom, completely convinced that he had successfully broken my spirit and secured a massive financial lifeline. I remained sitting at the dining table, listening intently to his footsteps climbing the grand staircase. I waited until I heard the heavy guest bedroom door close. I waited another 45 minutes until the house was completely silent. The moment I was certain he was asleep, my entire demeanor shifted. The fragile, weeping wife vanished into thin air. I stood up from the table, my spine perfectly straight and my expression completely cold. I walked silently up the back staircase to my master bedroom and changed out of my conservative floral dress. I slipped into a sharp, tailored black suit. I grabbed my encrypted laptop, my leather briefcase, and my car keys. I walked out to the garage and started my Mercedes. I did not drive to a hotel. I drove straight into the heart of downtown Atlanta, pulling into the underground parking garage of my corporate headquarters. It was nearly 2 in the morning, but the lights in my executive boardroom were blazing brightly. As I walked through the double glass doors, my elite team of corporate lawyers was already gathered around the massive mahogany conference table. These were not gentle family law attorneys who negotiated standard divorce settlements. These were vicious corporate litigators, ex-federal prosecutors, and aggressive asset recovery specialists. "Good morning, Nia," my lead counsel Marcus said, sliding a cup of black coffee across the table toward me. "We reviewed the encrypted files you sent over earlier. Kendrick did an absolute masterpiece of an audit on that church ledger." I took a seat at the head of the table, opening my laptop. "Do we have enough for a federal indictment?" I asked, looking directly at Marcus. Marcus smiled, a predatory smile that made him worth every single dollar of his exorbitant hourly rate. "We have wire fraud. We have corporate embezzlement. We have falsified tax documents regarding the shell company he used to buy the Marietta house. The paper trail is completely undeniable. If we hand this over to the white-collar crime division of the FBI, David and his mother are looking at a minimum of 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Do not contact the FBI just yet," I instructed, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "I am hosting his 10-year anniversary gala next week at the Four Seasons. All of his investors will be there. I want the federal arrest warrant signed and ready to execute exactly on the night of the gala." The room went entirely silent for a moment as the lawyers processed the sheer brutality of my plan. Then one of the senior partners let out a low, appreciative chuckle. What about the assets? Marcus asked, tapping his pen against his legal pad. He forged your signature as a corporate guarantor to secure the loan for his mistress's house. Draft an emergency federal asset recovery lawsuit. I ordered, my voice echoing sharply in the large boardroom. I want an immediate freeze placed on every single account associated with Horizon Vista Holdings. I want the Marietta property seized by the bank the morning after the gala. He thought he could use my money to buy his secret family a luxury life. I am going to make sure they end up with absolutely nothing. The lawyers immediately began typing frantically on their laptops, preparing the legal documents that would systematically destroy David's entire existence. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline. David was currently sleeping soundly in my expensive guest bed, dreaming of the massive corporate party I was supposedly throwing to celebrate his success. He had absolutely no idea that the guillotine was already built, and he was going to place his own head willingly on the chopping block. The sun rose over Atlanta, casting a bright, brilliant orange glow across my boardroom. I formally dismissed my legal team at dawn, thanking them for their relentless overnight work. I drove back to my Buckhead estate, slipping quietly through the back door just as the coffee maker began to brew. David came downstairs a short while later, fully dressed in his custom-tailored suit. He looked completely energized and entirely restored by the utter delusion of my submission. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a mug of black coffee, and kissed my cheek with a sickening amount of enthusiasm. He was completely convinced that his problems were permanently solved, and that his wealthy wife had been successfully put back into her obedient place. I smiled back at him, played the role of the devoted, supportive partner, and told him I would handle absolutely everything for his upcoming corporate gala. As soon as his car disappeared down the long gated driveway, my domestic performance abruptly ended. I went straight to the massive marble island in the center of the kitchen and began putting together a lavish get-well gift basket. I meticulously packed it with imported organic teas, gourmet Swiss chocolates, and a highly expensive oversized plush teddy bear for Zuri. I wrapped the entire arrangement in clear cellophane and tied a perfect golden ribbon around the top. It was the absolute perfect Trojan horse. I placed the massive basket in the passenger seat of my Mercedes-Benz and programmed the GPS navigation system for the specific Marietta address I had uncovered the night before. The drive out to the northern suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. When I finally pulled onto the quiet, pristine, tree-lined street, my chest tightened with a cold, heavy pressure. I parked my luxury car directly in front of the massive property. I sat behind the steering wheel for a long moment, just staring through the windshield. The lawn was perfectly manicured with vibrant flower beds lining the front porch. The exterior was a flawless classic red brick. Every single blade of grass, every asphalt shingle on the roof, and every perfectly laid brick in that wide driveway was paid for by the life insurance money my father literally worked himself to death to leave me. David had taken the physical manifestation of my late father's unconditional love and handed it to a woman who smiled in my face while actively destroying my family. I grabbed the heavy gift basket, stepped out of the car, and walked slowly up the paved concrete walkway. The neighborhood was completely silent, except for the distant sound of a lawnmower. I stepped onto the wide front porch and pressed the illuminated doorbell. I heard the faint rhythmic sound of footsteps approaching from the other side. The heavy wooden front door swung open, revealing the woman who had been secretly sleeping with my husband for the last decade. Chloe stood in the doorway, and for a split second, genuine panic flashed across her wide brown eyes. She clearly did not expect the betrayed wife to show up unannounced on her front porch less than 24 hours after the hospital confrontation. But her sudden panic vanished almost instantly, swiftly replaced by a look of sheer arrogant triumph. My eyes immediately locked onto what she was wearing. It was an emerald green silk robe. I recognized the intricate stitching instantly because it was mine. It was a highly expensive custom-tailored piece I had personally purchased during a corporate business trip to Milan 2 years ago. When it mysteriously went missing from my master closet, David had casually blamed our weekly housekeeping service, claiming the maids must have ruined it in the laundry and thrown it away to hide their mistake. And here was my supposed best friend, wearing my stolen Italian silk robe, standing comfortably inside the suburban house bought with my stolen inheritance. Well, look who decided to finally come down from her high and mighty corporate ivory tower, Chloe said, leaning casually against the doorframe and crossing her arms over her chest. She did not bother to invite me inside the house. I brought a get-well basket for Zuri, I said, my voice perfectly steady, polite, and completely devoid of any hostility. I heard she was being discharged from the hospital this afternoon to finish recovering at home. I wanted to make sure she had something to smile about when she arrived. Chloe let out a sharp, incredibly condescending laugh. She looked me up and down, taking in my sharp, tailored suit and my designer heels. She was completely misinterpreting my calm, professional demeanor for absolute defeat, just like David had done the night before. "It is so sweet of you to finally accept your place, Nia," she said, her voice dripping with venomous, patronizing pity. She reached out with one manicured hand and deliberately adjusted the lapels of my stolen silk robe, making sure I noticed exactly what she was wearing. "David told me all about your pathetic little emotional breakdown last night. He told me you begged him to stay with you and offered to pay all the hospital bills just to keep him around. Honestly, it is exactly what I expected from you. David always said you were good for funding, but I was good for a family." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her statement hung heavy in the warm morning air. She was openly mocking me to my face, entirely convinced that she was the absolute victor in this twisted, decade-long competition. She genuinely believed I was just a walking automated teller machine that she and David had successfully hacked. "You always did know how to play the dutiful little workhorse," Nia Chloe continued, a wicked, malicious smile spreading across her face. "It reminds me exactly of our days back at the university. You were always locked inside the campus library, stressing over your grade point average and begging professors for prestigious business internships. You thought being smart and getting straight A's made you superior to everyone else. But you never actually understood how the real world works for women like us." I stood perfectly still, letting her run her mouth. Giving your enemy a completely unobstructed platform to expose their massive, fragile ego is the very first rule of crisis management. "Do you remember homecoming weekend during our junior year?" Chloe asked, her eyes gleaming with toxic nostalgia. "You spent 3 entire weeks trying to get the attention of the captain of the Morehouse debate team. You bought a brand new expensive dress and memorized all his favorite political topics just so you could sound interesting. But at the tailgate party, he spent the entire night buying me drinks because I actually knew how to make a man feel like a real man. I always got the guys you liked, Nia. You just never wanted to admit that I was the one they truly wanted." She took a confident step closer to me, her smirk widening into a full, arrogant grin. "You thought because you got the fancy corporate job and the massive bank account that you had finally beaten me. You thought you left me behind to struggle while you lived in luxury. But I got the ultimate prize. David is a traditional man. He wants a woman who actually needs his protection and his leadership, not a masculine boss who treats him like one of her corporate employees. You can keep paying for his expensive dinners and leasing his luxury cars, Nia. But at the end of the day, he comes home to this beautiful house. He comes home to our beautiful daughter. And he comes home to me." She paused, taking a deep breath and clearly waiting for me to shatter into a million pieces. She desperately wanted me to scream. She wanted me to drop the heavy gift basket and cry hysterically on her front porch so she could immediately call David and tell him how unhinged and jealous I was acting. She wanted the absolute supreme satisfaction of breaking my heart right there on her doorstep while wearing my clothes. Instead, I offered her a warm, incredibly serene smile. I extended my arms and held the massive gift basket out toward her, maintaining perfect, unblinking eye contact. "I am truly glad Zuri is recovering, Chloe," I said, my tone completely even and utterly devoid of any anger. "She is an innocent child who did not ask to be brought into any of this, and she absolutely deserves to be healthy." Chloe looked visibly disappointed that she had not managed to provoke a massive screaming match, but she reached out and took the heavy basket from my hands anyway. She looked down at the expensive gourmet chocolates and the plush bear, a smug look of intense entitlement quickly returning to her face. "Thanks," she muttered. shifting the large basket onto her hip. I will tell Zuri her generous Aunt Nia stopped by to pay her respects. I took a slow, deliberate step back off the front porch, standing firmly on the paved concrete walkway. I looked up at the beautiful, pristine brick facade of the house my father's sweat and blood had unknowingly paid for. I looked at the large bay windows, the custom front door, and the expensive landscaping. Then I looked back at the deeply manipulative woman, wearing my clothes and sleeping with my husband. "Enjoy the house, Chloe," I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the quiet suburban neighborhood. "Make sure you check the mail tomorrow." I did not wait for her to respond. I turned around and walked confidently back to my black Mercedes. My posture was flawless, my head was held high, and my stride was perfectly measured. I unlocked the luxury car, slid gracefully into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced up into my rearview mirror. Chloe was still standing on the front porch holding the massive gift basket. The arrogant, triumphant smirk had completely vanished from her face. Her brow was heavily furrowed, and she was staring after my departing car with a look of deep, unsettled confusion. She had absolutely no idea what my final words meant. She thought she had completely outsmarted me. But she was about to find out that the ultimate prize she had spent 10 years stealing was actually a massive ticking federal time bomb, and she was standing directly in the blast radius. The next 5 days passed in a blur of meticulous high-stakes preparation. I did not spend my time crying or wallowing in self-pity. I completely immersed myself in organizing the apex of my husband's professional life. The 10-year anniversary gala for Apex Financial Solutions was going to be the absolute social event of the season. My public relations firm spared absolutely no expense. We secured the grand ballroom at the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Atlanta. I personally curated the guest list, ensuring that the absolute upper echelon of Atlanta's Black elite would be in attendance. We invited high-net-worth investors, prominent local politicians, several members of the city council, and the top executives from every major banking institution in the state of Georgia. David was completely ecstatic. He walked around our Buckhead estate with his chest puffed out, entirely convinced that his grand manipulation had worked perfectly. He watched my team of event planners coordinate the lavish floral arrangements, the premium open bars, and the highly expensive string quartet. He genuinely believed that my aggressive organizing was my desperate, pathetic way of proving my worth to him. He thought I was trying to buy back his affection. He was completely blind to the fact that I was actually building a highly publicized, brightly lit stage for his public execution. The evening of the gala finally arrived. I was sitting in the master suite of our home, surrounded by a professional glam squad. My makeup artist was applying a flawless layer of crimson lipstick, while my hairstylist pinned the final loose curls of my updo into perfect place. The atmosphere in the room was entirely calm, but my heart was beating with the steady, rhythmic precision of a ticking clock. The heavy wooden door to the master suite clicked open and David walked in. He was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo with a crisp white shirt and a silk bow tie draped loosely around his neck. He looked incredibly handsome, the absolute picture of a wealthy, successful financial advisor. He dismissed the makeup artist and the hairstylist with a quick wave of his hand. They quietly packed their extensive kits and hurried out of the room, leaving us completely alone. David walked over to my vanity and leaned against the marble countertop. He looked at me through the large illuminated mirror, his expression shifting from arrogant pride to something slightly more cautious. He had a specific look in his eyes that I recognized instantly. It was the exact same look he always gave me right before he was about to push a massive boundary and demand something incredibly unreasonable. "You look absolutely breathtaking, Nia." He started, offering a smooth, practiced compliment that completely lacked any genuine warmth. "The event planners just sent me the final layout for the ballroom. It looks incredible. You have truly outdone yourself." "Get to the point, David," I thought to myself, keeping my face perfectly composed. "Thank you," I said softly, picking up a pair of diamond earrings from the vanity. "I want tonight to be absolutely perfect for you." David cleared his throat, adjusting his heavy gold cufflinks. About tonight, he began, his voice taking on a casual, dismissive tone. I made a slight addition to the VIP guest list this afternoon. I paused, placing the diamond earring back down onto the velvet tray. I turned around on the padded vanity stool to face him directly. Who did you invite at the absolute last minute, David? The seating chart for the plated dinner is already completely finalized. I invited Chloe, he said, looking me squarely in the eye. The absolute, sheer, unadulterated disrespect of his statement hung heavily in the air between us. He had actually invited his mistress, the mother of his secret child, to a highly publicized corporate gala that I was fully funding and organizing. I maintained my carefully constructed mask of a fragile, submissive wife. I let my eyes widen in feigned shock, and I allowed my breathing to become slightly shallow. David, why would you do that? I asked, keeping my voice low and heavily laced with artificial hurt. You promised me we were going to use tonight to show everyone that our marriage is strong. Why would you bring her into my space on a night like this? David let out a long, exasperated sigh, running a hand over his freshly lined-up haircut. He immediately shifted into his favorite tactic, which was using my own professional logic against me. Zuri was finally discharged from the hospital yesterday, and she is resting comfortably at home with a private nurse. He explained, his tone incredibly condescending. Chloe is completely exhausted, Nia. She has been sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs and dealing with massive amounts of stress. She just needs a night out to clear her head and be around adults. He took a step closer to me, leaning down to aggressively invade my personal space. And let us be completely honest about the public relations aspect of this. He continued, a wicked, arrogant smirk, touching the corners of his mouth. Everyone in our inner circle knows that she is my incredibly close friend. Some of them even know about the child. If we completely exclude her from the biggest event of the year right after her daughter almost died, it is going to look incredibly bitter and petty on your part. You are a professional crisis manager, Nia. You know exactly how to handle public appearances. You need to just swallow your pride, smile for the cameras, and treat her like an honored guest. It protects your image just as much as it protects mine. I stared at the man I had called my husband for an entire decade. His absolute narcissism was a bottomless black hole. He was actively commanding me to play the gracious host to the woman who had stolen my life insurance inheritance and slept in my bed. He expected me to serve her expensive champagne and smile at her while the entire city of Atlanta watched. He was testing his absolute dominance over me, demanding that I publicly submit to his ultimate authority. 10 days ago, this exact conversation would have completely broken me. I would have screamed, I would have thrown my expensive makeup across the room, and I would have demanded a divorce right then and there. But I was no longer the heartbroken wife. I was the architect of his total destruction. I slowly stood up from the padded vanity stool. I was wearing a custom-designed floor-length emerald green silk gown. The rich dark color was a highly deliberate choice, directly mirroring the stolen silk robe Chloe had flaunted in my face just a few days prior. The dress hugged my curves perfectly, cascading down to the floor in a pool of expensive, heavy fabric. I looked incredibly lethal, powerful, and entirely untouchable. David took a slight step back, visibly taken aback by how intensely commanding I looked standing in front of him. The fragile, weeping woman he thought he had completely conquered was nowhere to be found. I reached out and gently took hold of the untied silk bow tie, resting against his crisp white collar. My hands were completely steady. Not a single finger trembled. My palms were not sweating. I moved my hands with absolute, terrifying precision, deftly looping the black silk and pulling it into a perfectly symmetrical knot at the base of his throat. I smoothed down the lapels of his expensive tuxedo jacket, my hands resting flat against his chest. I could feel the steady, arrogant rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the fabric. You are absolutely right, I said, my voice dropping into a smooth, velvety whisper that echoed perfectly in the quiet bedroom. Public appearances are everything. We must present a completely united front. If Chloe needs a night out to celebrate, then she should absolutely be there to witness exactly what you have built. David let out a massive sigh of relief, a triumphant, arrogant smile breaking out across his handsome face. He genuinely thought he had just won the ultimate victory. He thought he had successfully trained his wealthy, ambitious wife to accept his mistress in public. He reached forward and pressed a firm kiss against my cheek. "I knew you would understand," he said, his voice dripping with deep, patronizing approval. "You are an incredible woman, Nia." I stepped back away from his touch, picking up my custom diamond-studded clutch from the vanity. I looked him directly in the eyes, a cold, calculating light flashing behind my own. "Tonight is going to be a night everyone in Atlanta remembers, David." I promised, my tone completely level and absolute. "I promise you that." He smiled brightly, entirely, missing the heavy, fatal double meaning behind my words. "Let us go make history," he said, turning around and walking confidently out of the master suite. I followed him down the grand winding staircase of our Buckhead estate. My heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floors, a steady, aggressive march toward the final battle. We stepped out the heavy front doors and into the warm, humid Atlanta evening. A massive black stretch limousine was already idling in the circular driveway, waiting to transport us to the Four Seasons. The professional driver stepped out immediately, pulling open the heavy rear door for us. David slid into the luxurious leather seats, first immediately reaching for the crystal decanter of champagne resting in the illuminated minibar. I gathered the heavy emerald silk of my gown and slid in right next to him. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing us inside the quiet, soundproof cabin. The limousine slowly rolled forward, pulling out of the iron gates and merging onto the busy evening streets. David poured 2 glasses of sparkling champagne, handing one to me with a massive, victorious grin. Just as my fingers wrapped around the chilled crystal flute, my phone vibrated sharply inside my clutch. I set the champagne glass down in the cup holder and unclasped the diamond-studded bag. I pulled out my phone, keeping the screen carefully angled away from David's line of sight. The glowing display showed a secure, encrypted text message from Marcus, my lead corporate attorney. I tapped the screen, opening the message. It contained exactly 2 sentences. "The warrants have been signed by the federal judge. The caterers are in position." I locked my phone and dropped it back into my clutch. The caterers were not there to serve the expensive crab cakes or pour the premium vodka. The caterers were a highly specialized team of undercover federal agents from the White-Collar Crime Division. They were currently standing inside the grand ballroom, wearing crisp white aprons, waiting patiently for the guest of honor to arrive. I picked my champagne glass back up and turned to look at David. He raised his glass toward me, ready to toast to his own massive ego. To 10 years of absolute success, he declared blindly, raising his glass in the air. I clinked my crystal flute against his, a slow, dark, incredibly dangerous smile spreading across my face. "To getting exactly what you deserve," I replied. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive champagne, turning my head to look out the tinted window as the glittering lights of downtown Atlanta rapidly approached. The trap was completely set. The entire audience was seated. It was finally time to pull the trigger. The stretch limousine glided to a smooth halt beneath the massive illuminated awning of the Four Seasons Hotel. The valet immediately stepped forward and pulled open the heavy door. David stepped out first, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with a sharp, practiced tug, before turning to offer me his hand. I ignored it entirely, stepping out onto the red carpet under my own power. Flashbulbs from local society photographers immediately began to pop, capturing the arrival of the wealthy power couple. I smiled for the cameras, projecting the exact image of a supportive, proud wife, while my mind cataloged every single exit in the building. We walked through the opulent lobby and approached the grand ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors were thrown wide open, revealing an absolutely breathtaking scene. My public relations team had executed my vision flawlessly. Towering crystal centerpieces adorned every table, reflecting the warm glow of massive overhead chandeliers. An elegant jazz quartet was playing softly in the corner, providing the perfect, sophisticated soundtrack for the evening. The room was already packed to maximum capacity with Atlanta's elite. I saw state senators, bank executives, and high-profile real estate developers mingling happily with crystal glasses of champagne in their hands. And weaving seamlessly through the crowd wearing crisp white button-down shirts and black aprons were the caterers. I recognized the sharp, observant eyes of the undercover federal agents immediately. They were passing out expensive hors d'oeuvres and pouring premium wine, completely blending in with the hotel staff. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man holding a silver tray of crab cakes, caught my eye and offered a barely perceptible nod. The perimeter was completely secure. There was absolutely no way out. David immediately abandoned my side the second we crossed the threshold, diving into the crowd to shake hands and aggressively network with his investors. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing agent and began my own slow, deliberate sweep of the room. I spotted Mama Pearl almost immediately. She was hovering near the far edge of the ballroom, standing uncomfortably close to a massive ice sculpture. She was not wearing her usual extravagant church attire. Instead, she wore a muted dark navy dress, and she had completely abandoned her signature oversized hats. She looked incredibly small and intensely paranoid. Every time the heavy ballroom doors opened, she flinched violently, expecting the police to storm the room. When her eyes accidentally locked onto mine across the crowded floor, the sheer terror on her face was deeply satisfying. She immediately turned her back to me, pretending to be utterly fascinated by a platter of smoked salmon. I continued my walk, noticing a familiar scowling face hiding in the dimly lit corner near the secondary bar. Tasha had managed to sneak in. David must have quietly added her to the guest list, feeling sorry for her after the eviction. She was wearing a cheap, fast-fashion dress that looked entirely out of place among the designer gowns filling the room. She stood there gripping a cocktail glass, glaring fiercely at me from across the room. She thought her angry stares were intimidating. She looked like a pathetic, angry child who had been put in timeout, and I dismissed her from my mind entirely. The atmosphere in this room was buzzing with wealth and privilege. But the energy violently shifted the exact moment the main doors opened again. Chloe made her grand entrance. She walked into the ballroom wearing a plunging crimson-red gown that was highly inappropriate for a corporate financial gala. She paused in the doorway, making absolutely sure that everyone in the room noticed her arrival. My eyes instantly locked onto her neck, and my blood turned completely to ice. She was dripping in diamonds. But they were not just any diamonds. Around her neck sat a heavy vintage Cartier tennis necklace, and dangling from her ears were flawless teardrop diamond earrings. They belonged to me. They were the highly expensive anniversary gifts David had bought me 5 years ago, using my own money, of course. I had kept them securely locked in the heavy steel safe inside my master closet. David had actually cracked my personal safe, stolen my expensive jewelry, and draped it across his mistress to make her look wealthy in front of his elite clients. The absolute staggering disrespect of the gesture was almost suffocating. He wanted to parade her around the room wearing the literal spoils of my hard work. David saw her standing in the doorway, and his face lit up with an arrogant, victorious smile. He completely ignored the prominent city councilman he was speaking to and walked straight across the center of the ballroom toward Chloe. The entire room watched as he approached her. He leaned in and kissed her firmly on the cheek, lingering just a second too long for it to be considered a platonic greeting. He placed his hand on the small of her back and began guiding her through the crowd of wealthy investors. He walked her directly over to a group containing the chief executive officer of a major regional bank and a prominent state senator. I stood less than 10 feet away, completely unnoticed by David, listening intently to the introduction. "Gentlemen, I want you to meet Chloe," David said, his voice booming loudly over the jazz music. "She is a very close family friend. She has been an incredible source of support for my firm over the years." Chloe smiled brightly, reaching up to touch the stolen diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "It is so wonderful to meet all of you," she purred, batting her eyelashes at the bank executive. "David is simply brilliant. I tell him all the time that his integrity is what makes him so successful." The bank executive chuckled, nodding in agreement. "Well, David, you certainly keep beautiful company," he noted, completely oblivious to the massive scandal standing right in front of him. I watched the entire sickening interaction without flinching. I did not march over and demand my jewelry back. I did not throw my glass of water in her face. I simply smiled, took a slow sip of my drink, and watched an undercover federal agent disguised as a waiter smoothly top off David's champagne glass. Let them enjoy the stolen diamonds. Let them revel in their incredibly fake high society status. They were standing on a trapdoor, and my hand was already resting firmly on the lever. The clinking of silverware against crystal glasses signaled the beginning of the dinner service. The event coordinator stepped up to the microphone asking the guests to take their respective seats. David escorted Chloe to a prominent table right near the front, sitting her next to several of his most lucrative clients. He then practically sprinted up the stairs to the elevated stage, adjusting his tuxedo jacket one final time. The heavy crystal chandeliers dimmed slightly, casting a warm, theatrical spotlight directly onto David. The room fell completely silent. "Thank you all for being here tonight," David began, his voice echoing powerfully through the state-of-the-art sound system. 10 years ago, Apex Financial Solutions was just a small idea. It was built on a foundation of absolute transparency, unwavering integrity, and incredibly strong family values. I sat at the head table taking a slow, measured breath. The sheer hypocrisy rolling off his tongue was almost physically nauseating. He was standing in front of 200 people preaching about integrity while he actively embezzled their retirement funds to pay for his secret life. "We have weathered massive economic storms and difficult markets," David continued, gesturing expansively with his hands. "But we always put the client first. We always do the right thing even when no one is looking. That is the Apex promise." He paused, letting the heavy silence build the dramatic tension. He looked out into the crowd, his eyes bypassing Chloe and landing directly on me. He offered the audience a warm, incredibly fake smile. "And none of this massive success would be entirely possible without my rock," David said, his voice dripping with manufactured emotion. "My beautiful, incredibly supportive wife, Nia. She has stood by me through thick and thin. She has sacrificed her own time and energy to ensure that this firm thrives. I am the man I am today because of her unconditional love." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The wealthy investors clapped enthusiastically, completely buying into the wholesome family man narrative. I looked over at Chloe's table. She was rolling her eyes aggressively, taking a massive gulp of her champagne, looking highly annoyed that I was receiving public praise. At another table near the back, Mama Pearl was staring down at her empty plate, looking like she was desperately trying not to vomit. David beamed under the bright spotlight, soaking up the adoration of the room. He raised a hand, asking the crowd to quiet down. "I would love for my incredible wife to come up here and give the closing toast to officially kick off the evening," David announced, gesturing grandly toward my seat. The applause started again, louder this time. I stood up from my chair, smoothing down the heavy emerald silk of my custom gown. I walked slowly and deliberately toward the stage, every single eye in the grand ballroom locked onto me. I climbed the short staircase and stepped into the bright, glaring spotlight. David handed me the microphone, his fingers brushing against mine. He leaned in close, whispering so only I could hear. "You are doing great, baby. Just keep it short and sweet." He stepped back, giving me the center stage. I stood there looking out over the sea of incredibly wealthy, powerful people. I saw the bank executives, the politicians, the undercover federal agents, the arrogant mistress, and the terrified mother-in-law. I offered the crowd a bright, brilliant smile. Then I casually shifted my gaze toward the back of the massive room, looking directly into the dark glass window of the audio-visual control booth. I gave the lead technician a single sharp nod. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice ringing out clearly, cutting through the remaining applause. "Integrity is such an incredibly beautiful word. Let us take a very close look at yours." The main lights in the massive ballroom instantly snapped off, plunging the room into dramatic darkness. The jazz band stopped playing mid-note. A sudden loud mechanical hum filled the air as a massive 20-foot projection screen dropped rapidly from the ceiling directly behind David and me. Before anyone could even gasp in confusion, a high-definition projector fired up. A massive, brightly lit PowerPoint presentation violently illuminated the screen, completely blinding David, who had just turned around in absolute shock. The slaughter had officially begun. The massive high-definition projection screen behind me hummed with energy. I looked out at the absolute sea of confused, wealthy faces. David was frozen at the bottom of the stage, his smug smile completely wiped away. The jazz band had stopped playing mid-note, leaving a heavy ringing silence in the grand ballroom. The only sound was the quiet hum of the audiovisual equipment and the collective held breath of 200 elite guests. They had come here tonight expecting a boring corporate speech praising a successful financial firm. Instead, they were locked inside a room, about to witness a massive, carefully orchestrated public execution. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not show a single ounce of the emotional devastation that had consumed me just a week ago. I used my perfect, polished chief executive officer voice. It was the exact tone I used to close million-dollar corporate deals and handle massive public relations crises. It was calm, authoritative, and completely devoid of any mercy. Integrity is a beautiful word, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute crystal clarity through the state-of-the-art sound system. It is the foundation of trust. It is the absolute core of any successful financial institution. My husband has spent the last 10 minutes preaching about his unwavering commitment to family values and honesty. Let us take a very close look at David's integrity. I raised my right hand and pointed a small laser clicker directly at the audio-visual booth, located at the back of the ballroom. I pressed the button. The screen instantly flashed a brilliant bright white. A massive image appeared displaying the highly confidential human leukocyte antigen test results from Emory University Hospital. But I did not stop there. Placed right alongside the medical test was a secretly obtained copy of a state-issued birth certificate. The name Zuri Hayes was highlighted in bright neon yellow ink. Directly beneath that in the section, explicitly labeled for the biological father, David's full legal name, was printed for the entire city of Atlanta to read. The dates clearly showed that this child was conceived exactly 1 year after David and I were married. The collective gasp that erupted from the grand ballroom was absolutely deafening. It was a wave of pure, visceral shock that ripped through the crowd. 200 high-net-worth investors, state politicians, and prominent bank executives stared up at the massive projection screen in pure disbelief. The whispers started immediately spreading like a rapid wildfire across the room. I looked directly over at Chloe's table. She was completely frozen. Her crystal champagne flute stopped halfway to her mouth. The stolen vintage Cartier diamonds around her neck suddenly looked incredibly heavy, dragging her down into the dirt where she belonged. The prominent bank executive sitting right next to her slowly pushed his chair away, the friendly smile completely vanishing from his face. He looked at her with absolute sheer disgust, suddenly realizing he had just spent the last hour politely networking with a secret mistress who was actively destroying a marriage. Chloe tried to shrink down into her chair, her face flushing a deep, humiliating shade of red. The wives of the investors sitting at her table began glaring at her, whispering harshly to their husbands. At the back of the room, I heard a loud, dramatic wail. Mama Pearl had completely lost her composure, entirely unable to handle the sudden public exposure of her precious son's highly guarded sins. She was fanning herself frantically, looking around for an exit. But the federal agents, disguised as waiters, were subtly blocking the main doors. I did not give the crowd time to fully recover from the first massive shock. I wanted to keep them completely off balance. I pressed the laser clicker again. The screen instantly switched to the second slide. This time it displayed the highly confidential state incorporation documents for a Delaware shell company named Horizon Vista Holdings. The slide was meticulously designed like a corporate flowchart, showing a massive red arrow pointing directly from my personal joint investment account to the purchase deed of a Marietta suburban home. I did not just discover a decade-long affair, I explained smoothly, pacing slowly across the edge of the elevated stage. I discovered a massive, calculated financial betrayal. The luxury home that Chloe currently lives in, the very roof over her head, was completely funded by my late father's life insurance policy. David systematically drained $200,000 of my personal inheritance to secretly purchase real estate for his mistress. He stole from his own wife, the very woman who funded his lifestyle to comfortably house his double life. He took the legacy of a hard-working postal worker and handed it to a woman who smiled in my face while secretly sleeping with my husband. He stood up here and told all of you that he was a master of financial integrity. He asked you to trust him with your massive retirement portfolios and your corporate assets. But he could not even keep his hands out of his own wife's bank accounts. This was the exact moment the sheer weight of reality finally crashed down on David. The polished, wealthy corporate facade shattered entirely, leaving behind a terrified, desperate man. He let out a loud, guttural scream of pure panic and rage. He charged up the short wooden staircase, rushing the stage with his hands aggressively outstretched. He was trying to violently rip the microphone right out of my hands to silence me. He looked completely unhinged, his expensive tuxedo jacket flying open, his silk bow tie completely askew, and his face flushed a deep, dangerously angry red. "Stop this right now!" he screamed, his voice cracking under the intense, crushing pressure. "Do not listen to her. She is completely crazy. She is hysterical. She has completely lost her mind because she is jealous. Turn off the screen right now. I order you to turn it off." He lunged at me, his eyes wide with absolute manic desperation. I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I easily sidestepped his clumsy, aggressive movement, my emerald silk gown swirling gracefully around my ankles. Before he could even recover his balance, my private security detail emerged rapidly from the dark shadows flanking the stage. Derek, my massive head of corporate security, stepped directly between David and me. He placed a massive heavy hand firmly on David's chest, shoving him backward with incredible unyielding force. David stumbled back, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the polished wood. He nearly fell entirely off the edge of the elevated stage. Derek stood there like an absolute brick wall, crossing his muscular arms and silently daring David to take another step forward. The physical barrier completely broke David's momentum, leaving him trapped at the edge of the stage, hyperventilating under the bright spotlight. The ballroom was now in a state of absolute unprecedented pandemonium. Several guests were actively pulling out their mobile phones, holding them high in the air to record the massive public meltdown. Wealthy investors were angrily shouting at each other, realizing that the man actively managing their millions of dollars was a complete fraud and a thief. The pristine, untarnished reputation of Apex Financial Solutions was completely burning to the ground right in front of their eyes. Decades of networking, trust, and elite social standing were vaporized in less than 3 minutes. David looked out at the angry, shouting crowd, his hands shaking violently. He turned back to look at me, pure, absolute hatred burning in his eyes. "You ruined me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the roaring crowd. "You took everything from me." I raised the microphone back to my lips, completely ignoring his pathetic whispering. I needed to deliver the final lethal blow. I commanded the absolute attention of the chaotic room with my posture alone. The shouting slowly died down as everyone waited with bated breath to hear exactly what I would say next. They thought the show was over. They thought they had seen the absolute worst of it. They had absolutely no idea that I was just getting started. "But infidelity is not a crime," I said smoothly, looking directly down at my pathetic husband, trembling helplessly behind my massive security guard. "Stealing marital assets is a terrible civil matter. It certainly makes you a completely horrible husband and an incredibly dangerous, deeply unethical financial advisor who should never be trusted with another penny." I paused for a brief moment, letting the incredibly heavy, suffocating silence stretch completely across the entire grand ballroom. I raised my hand and pressed the small laser clicker one final time. "However, what is on the next slide absolutely is a federal offense that comes with mandatory prison time. I pressed the small laser clicker one final time. The massive screen behind me flickered momentarily before transitioning to a new, high-definition image. This time, there were no birth certificates or residential property deeds. It was a heavily redacted bank ledger, but the crucial account names and routing numbers were left perfectly clear for everyone to read. At the top of the document, the header displayed the name First Mount Zion Baptist Church Women's Ministry Building Fund. And right below it, connected by a solid red line, indicating a direct wire transfer, was the receiving account. Apex Financial Solutions. I turned my gaze away from the screen and looked directly at the tables where his wealthiest investors were seated. I made sure to lock eyes with the prominent state senator and the chief executive officer of the regional bank. Last year, David made a catastrophic series of highly unauthorized, incredibly risky trades. Using your premium retirement portfolios, I announced, my voice echoing relentlessly through the perfectly tuned sound system. He faced a massive margin call that would have instantly bankrupted this firm and triggered an immediate federal audit. But instead of taking accountability for his massive professional failures, he went to his mother. He convinced the treasurer of a tax-exempt religious organization to wire $65,000 of stolen charity funds to his firm to secretly cover his bad debts. The uproar from the crowd was instantaneous and violently angry. The initial shock of the infidelity was completely eclipsed by the absolute sheer fury of financial betrayal. High net worth clients began standing up, throwing their expensive cloth napkins onto the tables and pointing accusatory fingers directly at David. The prominent state senator looked physically ill, gripping the edge of his table as he realized his political campaign was now tied to a massive embezzler. At the back of the room, Mama Pearl let out a loud, dramatic wail, finally collapsing heavily into a chair and burying her face in her trembling hands. Her holy secret was entirely exposed. David realized his career was completely permanently dead. The Golden Boy facade shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Cornered animals are incredibly predictable. When they realize they cannot escape the trap, they do not surrender. They attack. David stopped trying to defend his integrity to the angry crowd. He snapped his head toward me, his face contorting into an ugly, vicious mask of pure, entitled rage. He looked up at me standing above him on the elevated stage and spat a venomous, arrogant laugh that cut through the shouting of the investors. "You actually think you won?" he screamed, his voice cracking wildly as it echoed through the grand ballroom. He took a threatening step toward the stage, completely ignoring the massive security guards blocking his path. "You think you can just destroy my firm, embarrass me in front of my clients, and walk away cleanly? We live in the state of Georgia, Naya. There is absolutely no prenuptial agreement between us. I am your legal husband. I own half of everything you have ever built." He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger directly at my face. "I own half of your pristine public relations empire. I own half of that massive luxury estate in Buckhead. I own half of every single dollar sitting in your corporate bank accounts. I will hire the most vicious divorce attorneys in the state. I will take 50% of your entire life and I will use your own money to build myself back up. You are giving me millions of dollars tonight, Nia. You just handed me the ultimate payday." I stood perfectly still under the bright theatrical spotlight. I did not recoil from his venom. I did not show a single ounce of fear. I let his greedy, desperate words wash over the angry crowd, allowing every single investor to witness the absolute depths of his parasitic nature. And then I laughed. It was a cold, sharp, incredibly dark laugh that sliced through the tension in the room. The sound was so entirely devoid of warmth that it completely silenced the shouting investors. Everyone in the grand ballroom stopped to watch exactly how the betrayed wife was going to respond to this massive financial threat. "You really should have paid closer attention to the legal paperwork, David," I replied, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register that commanded absolute authority. "When you created your secret corporate shell company to buy that Marietta house for your mistress, you did not just steal my father's life insurance money. You forged my signature on the bank loan documents. David's angry sneer faltered slightly, a tiny flicker of confusion crossing his eyes. You used my primary corporate holding company as the financial guarantor for the mortgage. I explained clearly, articulating every single syllable so the entire room could comprehend his fatal mistake. You committed direct corporate fraud against my business entity. You deliberately entangled my highly protected corporate assets in your illegal money laundering scheme. I took a slow, confident step toward the edge of the stage, looking down at him with absolute supreme pity. Because you committed blatant corporate fraud, my elite team of lawyers filed an emergency federal asset protection order at dawn this morning. I continued, my voice ringing out like a judge delivering a final sentence. A federal judge reviewed the forged documents and signed the injunction immediately. All of our joint assets are permanently frozen. My company is completely legally walled off from you. You are getting absolutely nothing. You do not own half of my company, David. You own 100% of a federal indictment. Right on cue, the heavy brass doors of the grand ballroom swung wide open with a massive, resounding crash. The jazz band had completely fled the stage minutes ago, but the room was suddenly filled with a brand new, terrifying sound. The sharp, heavy, incredibly synchronized footsteps of federal law enforcement entering the room. The caterers, who had been silently weaving through the crowd, serving expensive crab cakes and pouring premium champagne, abruptly stopped their duties. They placed their silver serving trays down on the nearest tables. They reached under their crisp white aprons and pulled out heavy gold shields, clipping them firmly to their belts and lapels. They were plainclothes special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division. David Hayes, a tall, broad-shouldered agent, announced, stepping forward from the shocked crowd of investors. His voice was an absolute thunderclap of legal authority, completely dominating the massive space. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and the misappropriation of tax-exempt religious funds. David froze, completely paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming presence of federal agents converging on him from every single angle. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an exit, but the perimeter was entirely sealed. Two agents flanked him immediately, grabbing his arms and aggressively pulling them firmly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the silent ballroom. It was the single most beautiful, satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. "No!" David screamed wildly, thrashing against the incredibly tight grip of the federal agents. "Wait, you cannot do this. I am a highly respected financial advisor. This is a massive misunderstanding. She set me up. She is lying about the signatures." The agents completely ignored his frantic, pathetic protests. One of them began loudly reciting his Miranda rights, while they forced him to march aggressively through the sea of wealthy elite guests. The prominent investors who had enthusiastically praised him just 20 minutes ago now stepped back in absolute sheer disgust, treating him like a highly contagious, deadly disease. Flashbulbs from the local society photographers erupted violently, capturing every single humiliating, agonizing second of his public perp walk. David violently twisted his neck, looking back at me as they dragged him toward the ballroom exit. His custom tuxedo jacket was wrinkled and falling off his shoulder. His dignity was entirely erased. "Nia," he pleaded, his voice shifting entirely from arrogant anger back to sheer, pathetic desperation. "Nia, please help me. Do not let them take me. Tell them it is a mistake. Please." I simply raised my glass of sparkling water, offering him a final, silent, elegant toast as he was shoved roughly through the double mahogany doors and out of my life forever. The heavy doors slammed shut behind him, leaving the grand ballroom in a state of stunned, electrified silence. Over by the ice sculpture, Mama Pearl was hyperventilating into a cloth napkin, being tended to by a panicked hotel manager. Tasha had completely vanished into thin air, likely fleeing the building the absolute second the federal gold badges appeared. I placed my microphone gently back onto the wooden podium. My decade-long war with David was completely, permanently finished. But the night was not over. I slowly turned my gaze away from the main exit. I looked across the crowded ballroom, scanning the sea of shocked, wealthy faces until I found exactly who I was looking for. Chloe was still sitting at the prominent front table. She was completely trapped. The bank executive and the state senator had entirely abandoned the table, leaving her sitting entirely alone under the bright, ambient lighting. She was shaking visibly violently, trembling inside the stolen emerald silk gown. Her hands were clutching the edge of the white tablecloth so tightly her knuckles were stark white. She had just watched the man she thought was her ultimate prize, her permanent ticket to a life of high society luxury, get dragged out in steel handcuffs facing a decade in federal prison. She had absolutely no financial support left, no protector, no stolen credit cards to fund her lifestyle. I picked up the edges of my custom emerald silk gown and slowly descended the short wooden staircase leading down from the elevated stage. The massive crowd of wealthy investors seamlessly parted for me, stepping back respectfully to clear a direct, unobstructed path. I walked slowly, deliberately, my designer heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. Every single step was heavily measured. I did not rush. I wanted her to feel the agonizing, suffocating anticipation of her own absolute ruin. I walked directly toward the woman who had smiled in my face, stolen my inheritance, and secretly plotted my destruction. Chloe stared at me, approaching, her eyes wide with absolute sheer terror, completely paralyzed as I closed the distance between us. I finally stopped exactly 1 foot away from her table. Chloe looked up at me, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull oxygen into her panic-stricken lungs. The arrogant smugness she wore on her front porch was entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic realization that she was completely ruined. "Remember that mail I told you to check?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm, carrying easily in the hushed ballroom. Chloe swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously around the room, looking for anyone who might jump in to save her. No one moved. The federal agents were still securing the perimeter, and the wealthy guests were more than happy to watch the mistress meet her ultimate fate. It was a formal foreclosure notice. I continued, leaning slightly forward so she could hear every single devastating syllable. Because that Marietta house was purchased using stolen, fraudulent funds, my legal team executed an emergency seizure. The bank has officially taken possession of the property. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your bags and vacate the premises. Chloe let out a sharp, strangled gasp. "You cannot do that," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "Where am I supposed to go? I have a sick child." "That is a truly excellent question for your baby daddy," I replied, offering her a cold, merciless smile. "But since he is currently being processed at a federal holding facility, you might want to start looking into low-income housing options. Oh, and there is one more thing." I reached out, extending my hands directly toward her neck. Chloe stiffened, completely paralyzed by fear, but she did not dare pull away. "I am taking my jewelry back," I stated firmly. I slipped my fingers behind her neck, finding the intricate platinum clasp of the vintage Cartier tennis necklace. With a swift, practiced motion, I unhooked the heavy diamond piece and pulled it smoothly from her skin. The brilliant stones caught the light of the ballroom chandeliers as I gathered the necklace into my palm. I tossed it effortlessly into my designer clutch, snapping the clasp shut with a sharp, definitive click. "Good luck with the packing, Chloe," I said, turning my back on her and walking out of the grand ballroom without a single ounce of regret. She had spent 10 long years thinking she was winning a massive competition, but she was simply playing a rigged game. The subsequent fallout from that night was absolutely catastrophic for the entire Hayes family. They had built their entire identity on a foundation of lies and manipulation, and when that foundation crumbled, it buried all of them. Mama Pearl faced a highly publicized emergency tribunal at First Mount Zion Baptist Church. The Board of Deacons reviewed the irrefutable financial ledgers, proving she had stolen charity funds to protect her son. She was immediately permanently stripped of all her titles and officially excommunicated from the congregation in absolute disgrace. She lost the very social standing she worshipped. The powerful matriarch who used religion as a weapon was reduced to an isolated outcast, unable to even show her face at the local grocery store without facing intense public scrutiny. Tasha, having completely lost her free luxury condo and her unlimited credit cards, was forced to move into a cheap rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. Her wealthy high society friends blocked her number completely, cutting her off from the affluent lifestyle she desperately craved, and David, the golden boy who thought he was untouchable, was denied bail. The federal prosecutors piled on the charges, citing the severity of the wire fraud and the corporate embezzlement. He was offered a highly restrictive plea deal, but ultimately faced a mandatory sentence of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. He lost his firm, his licenses, his reputation, and his freedom. 3 months later, the humid Atlanta summer was giving way to a crisp, refreshing autumn. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the newly renovated wing of my corporate headquarters, looking out over the bustling city skyline. My public relations firm had actually gained massive respect and lucrative new contracts following my highly calculated handling of the crisis. The business world values absolute ruthless efficiency, and I had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was an incredibly formidable force. But my greatest victory was not corporate, it was deeply personal. I felt a profound sense of absolute peace. My legal team successfully forced the sale of the Marietta house at a public banking auction. The property sold for significantly more than its initial purchase price, allowing me to completely recover my stolen inheritance with interest. I did not put the money back into a joint investment account. I used the recovered funds to establish a permanent endowment at my beloved alma mater, Spelman College. I created a comprehensive STEM and business scholarship specifically designed to fund the full tuition of brilliant young Black women who possess the ambition to build their own empires. I named the scholarship fund in honor of my late father, ensuring that his hard-earned legacy would continue to empower and protect women for generations to come. He would have been incredibly proud. I walked back to my mahogany desk, running my hands smoothly over the polished wood. I was finally breathing incredibly clean air, completely free from the toxic, suffocating weight of a family that only valued me for my financial utility. They thought because I was a woman who valued my career, I was weak. They mistook my silence for submission. Sometimes the trash does not just take itself out, you have to set the whole dumpster on fire. Have you ever had to legally and financially destroy someone who tried to play with your life? Drop your stories in the comments below, hit subscribe, and remember, never let anyone make you the villain in a story where you were the only one keeping them alive. Thank you all. The most profound lesson from this ordeal is that true family is built on genuine respect and unwavering loyalty rather than just legal certificates or shared history. When the people who are supposed to protect you become your greatest threat, your financial and emotional independence becomes your strongest armor. Never apologize for your success or allow manufactured guilt to manipulate you into funding your own destruction. Betrayal thrives in silence and submission, but you are never the villain for refusing to remain a victim. Please drop a comment below if you have ever cut toxic ties to protect your peace.